Hello, welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your new host, Eliana Kernodle. I'm a former teacher, but I've been with the Franklin News Foundation for a while, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity to join Brendan every week to discuss the latest in K-12 news. Today, we're going to talk about the death of the non-binary teen Nex Benedict. Benedict's death and related events have made national headlines. There has been a lot of reporting on this situation from different perspectives, but one thing I think we can all agree on is that it's a tragedy and a very sad situation. Joining me, as always, is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, the Oklahoma Chief Medical Examiner's Office released a report last week. What did the report reveal about this situation?
Yeah, Eliana, it is, as you mentioned, a tragedy. Basically, the new report revealed that this was a suicide, and it also revealed that the family of the non-binary teenager Nex Benedict had turned over to police self-harm notes. So essentially that is sort of the basis of that determination. And this was not like a police report. This was like a medical examiner's report, and trying to get to the heart there of like how to categorize it. And that's made clear in the report. This isn't like putting guilt or anything on that. But it does make clear like that the amount of diphenhydramine and fluoxetine, which is essentially Prozac and Benadryl, right? These are pretty common like drugs, but if you mix them in high enough dosages, it can be fatal. So that's what, in terms of the additional information, that was one of those things of the specific levels of diphenhydramine and fluoxetine in Benedict's blood. But it also did find that Benedict's family had provided law enforcement with handwritten notes about the self-harm. And then that was what the medical examiner used to determine the death was a suicide. And so a little bit of context, we're talking about this in April. This actually occurred in the early part of February, on February 8th and 9th. And so the report, the examination was done on the 9th, I believe. So like the day after Benedict passed away. So that's really what it revealed, Eliana.
And how are these revelations different than a lot of the initial reporting on this situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when the Independent, I believe, is the first outlet to break the news about Benedict's death, and got a lot of attention, and essentially said, the headline there was Oklahoma banned trans students from bathrooms. Now Nex Benedict is dead after a fight at school. And so it was basically, here was a fight at school, and now this non-binary teenager is dead. And the Independent spoke with Sue Benedict, Nex Benedict's mom, and just talked about the experience that Nex had at school, and sort of tied it to some of these statewide policies and lawmakers, and some of the debates around LGBTQ plus students, sexual minority youth in the state. And essentially, the Independent tried to connect it to some of those larger picture debates that the state is having. So Oklahoma has just been, I've covered a lot of stuff in Oklahoma. There's a lot going on there with Superintendent Ryan Walters, the Libs of TikTok creator, Kaya Reichik. She was recently added to like a library review committee there, and received a lot of criticism, because she's been very vocal online about, different kinds of cultural hot button issues, like book removal, content moderation, those kinds of things. And advocates for LGBTQ plus students are saying, well, actually these sexual minority youth, they rely on these kinds of stories to find their identity affirmed. And so it's pretty easy to see how you can tie it to that. But essentially, the family had provided the medical examiner with these notes about self-harm, and none of that is mentioned in the reporting. I mean, a week and a half later, so there was like the reporting from the Independent was February 20th, right? And this report had been, the examination by the medical examiner had been done on February 9th. So this is about a week and a half later. There's still no mention. So it's like the family's narrative was very much focused on this fight, and saying, because of this fight, Nex Benedict is dead. And that's what the Independent had too. But it's clear from the report that the family knew about that and had provided that information to police already. And then that was not mentioned anywhere. So, and then there's a lot of progressive sort of advocacy groups kind of jumping on there too, and blaming, Ryan Walters and some of these different sort of debates around LGBTQ plus students. So I think that sort of muddied the water in terms of what really happened, which is, it's a mental health, issue potentially. Like, I think that that's the hard part, is that, it's maybe all of this is more connected, or, that there's more like the mental health issues going on, that, that's an incredible nationwide story in itself too, is that, teenagers during the pandemic and afterward have struggled immensely with this kind of thing, that these are sort of the treatments, the drugs can be toxic in high doses. And that's another kind of thing. So is it related to the fact that she was bullied at school? Yeah, probably. You know what I mean? Like that there are these different cultural issues that bleed over. But to be honest and to be nuanced about all the facts that we have available, including, 911 calls and that different kind of thing. So I think that's an important part of the conversation that was, sort of put aside to maybe to make way for more of a narrative of this is what we're hearing from the mom. And maybe that was not necessarily forthright.
So I guess just to clarify, in these articles, were they saying that there were injuries from the fight that led to Nex's death, or was maybe the implications that getting into this fight drove Nex to commit suicide, or was suicide never mentioned?
Yeah, so I think the initial reporting was that there was a fight, and because of the fight and the trauma that Nex sustained. So essentially, the Owasso, Oklahoma Police Department, they released a video of Nex Benedict in the hospital with her mom, basically explaining that while they did start their fight, they were beat and pretty badly, and at one point they lost consciousness. And so I think Benedict's mother, on the 911 call, she definitely connected that to the fight and said that, this has been there. And they blamed the school. Benedict's mother blamed the school for not sort of being more proactive, or maybe calling an ambulance and that. So there was definitely that sort of connotation, even if it was more implicit, that because of the fight, then Benedict ended up dead. And so that was more of because of the trauma, the injuries. But then the police later, a few news cycles later, the police released a statement saying that the fight was not the cause of death. And then, we have a confirmation from the medical examiner's office that the fight was not a cause of death. And then in fact, it was the combined toxicity of these drugs, which were found in their system. So that's the sort of nuanced revelations that came after the fact there. But that initial reporting, I think, definitely connoted that there was a fight, and that because of that fight, Benedict ended up in the hospital and eventually dead.
And it is known that the drugs in Nex Benedict's system, that combination can be problematic and even lethal. How did that factor into Chalkboard's early reporting on this situation?
Yeah, Eliana, that's a great question. So the Chalkboard initially looked at the 911 calls that the police department released. And in that case, when Benedict's mother is talking to the 911 dispatcher, she does connect it to the fight, as I mentioned earlier. But she also says that she was on fluoxetine and another drug, which I'm trying to remember the name of right now. But essentially just two different kinds of antidepressants, or for different kinds of mental health conditions. And so essentially those themselves have different kinds of, they don't work well together necessarily. They have to be taken at, in the right dosage, and sort of made sure that these are okay to be taken together, and that those do have adverse reactions. So that was sort of the initial reporting that Chalkboard did, is just looking at, there are some studies that say not to give these to certain demographics of people because they are harmful. They're known to have sort of these contraindications and these sorts of severe adverse events like death or a heart attack and that kind of thing. And so, it's the hard part with some of these drugs for mental health is that they're not entirely safe, right? That there are these issues that do come up from time to time and have these adverse reactions. So that was one way. And that, I think, Chalkboard's reporting got a little bit closer than some of these other platforms that were running with sort of this blaming lawmakers or the state leaders for this, or the Libs of TikTok creator, because it's sort of got to the heart of this is maybe more of a mental health issue, or maybe like a toxicity issue.
Well, thank you for your insights today, Brendan. Listeners can keep up with this story and all stories related to K-12 education at chalkboardnews.com.
Do you care about school spending, classroom curriculums, and transparency policies in education, but find it hard to cut through the partisan noise? The nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news reporting on education through Chalkboard News. We're talking news without spin. Franklin brings fact-based news that makes sense to everyday parents, teachers, and readers who have skin in the game. By donating to Franklin, you can help American families and communities receive the education-focused news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate.